Hi everyone, welcome to this paper, Black British Hauntology and Northamptonshire Response, based on my wider PhD investigation, which is about Caribbean Northamptonshire between 1940 and 1990. This was presented as part of the University of Northampton's conference Voices from the Marginalised as well. Philosopher Jacques Derrida used the word hauntology to describe the time-transcending battle or ability of Marxism to haunt the global West beyond the grave. It's in his debate of Karl Marx and that a spectre is haunting Europe, a spectre of communism, that Derrida invokes William Shakespeare's phrase that time is out of joint from Hamlet, also arguing there is no historical origin of a thing, event, and so on, but an already absent present. And to be fair, I find Derrida quite confusing, and Spectres of Marx not really written for regular people, but for an academic readership in mind. I found hauntology better articulated by others. Toni Morrison, for example, shows us that chattel enslavement was not only violent and exploitative, but also when it is supposed to be finished, it still haunts Black America today and really diaspora around the world. From talk of reparations to colonial statues, we are forced to coexist with the ghosts, as Avery Gordon calls, haunting as inheritance. Haunting as inheritance. Hamlet's claim that time is out of joint was useful for my PhD, when many people I talked to could recollect experiences, but could be less specific about time, the time of those experiences. Einstein called time nothing more than a persistent, stubborn illusion. Physicist Sabine Hossenfelder continues, this perplexing consequence of special relativity has been dubbed the block universe by physicists. In this block universe, the future, present, and the past exist in the same way. It's just we don't experience them in the same way. And if all times exist similarly, then all our past selves and our grandparents, our lives, the same way our present selves are. Taking this scientific explanation of time ultimately has a lot in common with how people I talk to remember, but then challenges how historians teach the past as not the now. Many people I interviewed talked to me through this sense of a block universe, raising characters from the grave, metaphorically. In 2023, Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, which is owned by West Northamptonshire Council, produced the exhibition Punk, Rage and Revolution, which told a local history of punk, including the place of the Rastafarian group Matafan Kanta youth movement on Sheep Street. However, the amnesia lives in, although WNC celebrated that organisation as Northampton Borough Council in the 70s and 80s, the council were a barrier to the development of black youth in Northampton. The council also demolished the building in 1995, reportedly in the middle of the night, with the building's entire contents inside. In the book Folklore of Wales, Ghosts, folklorists Delith Bader and Mark Norman describe poltergeists as a word generally applied to alleged hauntings that involve noises linked with or escalating to observable physical phenomena. The ability to cause physical injury to witnesses is one of the aspects which marks poltergeists apart from other hauntings. Going back to that site of a black youth movement today, might you hear a low rumble around the land that once housed Matafan Kanta, the haunting, the ghost, and ghosting elements of Black Northamptonshire came not only from how spaces and places were remembered in fragments and moments of memory, but also how local institutions practice a selective forgetting or historical amnesia of our local Black history as well. Many people I talked to about their lives in Northampton, Wellingborough, and also in Kettering between 1940 and 1990 pick up memories as if no time has passed at all, especially when it comes to childhood. They give up the ghost of deceased family members, like grandparents and family left behind. Interviewing my relatives, I was introduced to the ghost of my great-grandmother, Sita Ventour, who never left Grenada, and my other great-grandparents, Toyley and Ben Mark Noel, who came to Northampton in the 60s, living in Kingsthorpe first of all, and then later on in Abington at number 103 Bostock Avenue in 1967 until their own deaths in 1994. Coming from rural Grenada, Um, my grandmother's parents and my granddad's parents were farmers. Um, Millie Carty told, or Millie Arthur, nay Carty, told a similar story in Newton Ground, St Kitts. My mum was a dressmaker, and my dad made a living cutting sugarcane. Most people were self-sufficient. They grew their own produce and stuff, and a few of them would have livestock. Siblings, one Frater and Marcia Walker, talked to me about their grandparents too. Until she was 6, Marcia lived in a place called Duckenfield in Jamaica with her parents before going to Hampton Court into the parish of St Thomas to live with her maternal grandparents Alexander Nesbitt and Francesca McDowell. Growing up in the countryside, she took me back to her grandmother's ghosts, Francesca, who she helped grate coconut. Francesca would sell at the market on Saturdays. Alexander Nesbitt was not a black man, but what they called Assyrian. Ron remembers their grandfather being fair-skinned and having wavy hair. He recounted how the Nesbitts made their money loan sharking. When poorer people couldn't pay what they owed, they took the equivalent in land. Again, time was not that important, but the memory was. Through oral histories of those now dubbed as the Windrush generation, we see a phantasmic history where time is out of joint, and those echoes and murmurs of another era continue to be lived on through their children and grandchildren as if they were yesterday and not 70 odd years ago. Not everybody was able to go back to those decades and go to those decades ago, but that childhood played a vital role in the lives of Marcia, Ron, and Millie, and also my own grandparents in Grenada as well. They were able to go back. Have you ever wondered if you could visit somewhere where time flows differently, where 1 hour for you is like 7 years for someone else? This is the premise of Christopher Nolan's film Interstellar. For many who came up in England and experienced racism, from daily microaggressions to the more in-your-face terror, that may also impact the flow of time. Charles Mills called this racial time. So thinking about space, place, memory, and history, for some, little time may have passed at all. So collecting info became about focusing on the story and less on the specifics of dates. The timeline in my PhD was something I built around the interviews, not always something that people I talked to were able to bring up or recount, as they did not always remember. This would also highlight major difficulties for anybody who'd want to do research on Caribbean Northamptonshire who does not have the community contacts. It'll be like trying to catch a shadow, as lots of physical data has not been archived, and trying to find dates for stuff was like looking for fragments in white archives. So bringing up spaces and places, people associate emotions with certain areas, but the memory is not always clear on time. Much in the same way, questions of death and ghosts around people and families connected to Northamptonshire Caribbean. The same feeling can be said about spaces that were of local cultural importance. The decimation of Caribbean organisations was not only a culling of the organisational structures, but also the physical buildings. So the annihilation of groups showed up in local collective memories, where these spaces not only declined due to state racism, but from the turmoil within the Black community itself, including through fraudulent behaviour. Remembering Matafan Kanta means not only to remember the positive work in the building, but also how self-interest spiritually attached itself to how many remember it ended, including images of gun dealing as well. As folks reminisced, I saw how feelings of conflict were intimately connected to the buildings and the streets. So history, not as dates, but simply as not the now, were attached to place or geography, but feelings to also invoke Shakespeare as time is out of joint. Walking Northampton now is different to the 70s and 80s. So how does one do that when today's Northampton has been ghosted, so to speak? One of the first Caribbean social clubs in this country was in Northampton, first at Regent Square from 1961, then later on at Green Street opposite the train station from around 1979-1980, replaced with the University of Northampton's Innovation Centre in 2010. The African Caribbean Elders Society was at number 2 Park Avenue North by 1990 and was a community organisation designed to combat Black health inequalities, with the pioneering Mata Van Canter youth movement later demolished as well in January 95 on Sheep Street with its entire contents. Local photographer James Smith's project, Absent Status, documented locations of loss and mourning across Northants, like the barren land that once housed Mata Van Canter, or MFM as it was known, and its activity of youth expression. Smith's work illustrates how, while MFM, the building, was wiped off the face of the earth by what became West Northamptonshire Council, the memory of it remains. Beginning with the place of demolition in the post-war period will be to step towards a Black British psychogeography by extending ideas of pastness, not as then, but simply not the now. In 1955, Guy Debord popularized psychogeography to describe the study of the specific effects of the geographical environment on the emotions and behaviors of individuals. For places like social clubs and churches as sites of belonging, both a horror interpretation and nostalgic memories are states of being influenced by collective psychology. When you go back to these spaces and places, you can hear the silence. United Social Club was replaced with University of Northampton's Innovation Centre, where new histories were built on top of the old ones. So it's a story that's very much alive. Mainly for my own benefit, I started to refer to these things as anthropomorphic whiteness to give words to how objects like buildings, land, statues, and so on may be charged with, in some cases, human-made white racism, and how spaces of Black cultural significance come to be taken over through whiteness as ownership, as we've seen through processes of gentrification in areas like Hackney in London. So this term, anthropomorphic whiteness, meshes English literature with critical whiteness studies and sociology. So a feeling hangs in the air. And for my PhD, there's a persistent theme of demolition and the over and done withness coming back to haunt the present. History raises spectres. The present is always intruded upon by a restless past. These spaces are part of Northants Caribbean's heritage, but they also speak to the way whiteness, property, and ownership manifest at a local level. Doing this project has thrown up other ways of seeing, and not everything can be corroborated with observable data. So, for example, the value of dreams being one example. And this energy we find in space and place builds and builds into what I called the ancestral internet. There are other forces at play. Black British psychogeography and ghost studies adds an extra dimension to how we might do historical research. In the words of James Baldwin, people are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. And as always, if you enjoyed this video or you've got questions and comments, leave them in the comment section or send them to me in an email at treyventour.com/contact.